Welcome to episode 4, wherein we get to talk about speaker placement. Now, I've had some trouble with this particular episode thinking about it because all of the things that I could think of to say about it is you're screwed and it sucks. This is The Tank, which is a New York City off-Broadway space. It's a pretty nice little off-Broadway space. This is a CAD drawing somebody put on the internet for us. Now you roll into this space and you'll notice that there is a grid. You've got risers here. We're looking down on it. So you've got risers here. They put a little bit of a set in here. We can go in a little bit, and they've got some screens up and some backgrounds, and it's kind of cool. They have placed the speakers on stands, both stage left and stage right. Let me just zoom out a little bit so we can see. That's not likely to work. Now, the first thing you want to know is where would be the best place to put speakers in a space when you roll in? Well, in most spaces, the best place to put the speakers is going to be dead in the center of the stage, maybe 2 meters off the ground, about 6 feet off the ground, and pointed right at the audience. That obviously doesn't work because you have a significant dramatic problem if you put the speakers right there in the middle, because it becomes a show about speakers. So you can't even do that in a rock and roll show. Now, most of the time that you go into a space, your speakers are going to be pre-hung, as will most of your lights, and they'll basically, in a proscenium-ish space, they'll just be hung in the corner here and over here, so stage left and stage right, and they'll be sort of generally pointed at the audience. There's an issue with that. Back when we were talking about different ways to make sounds come off of the stage, you'll notice if you try to use a system like this for, say, a cell phone ringing on the stage, it probably won't really sound like it's coming from the stage. It'll sound like it's coming from those speakers that are way up there attached to the grid. All right, so let's look at, this is a fairly large theater, fairly sizable, 300 seats or so. Now, say you wanted to put some speakers behind this audience, and you can sort of see how big people are. There's one little guy there. You could put a speaker, say, over here in this corner. Maybe you could find a way to hang it even. Let me zoom around. The problem with that is having a speaker that's very, very close. Say you hung the speaker right here. This speaker is now very close to the people in this section. And honestly, in a very small space, if you try doing that, you'll frequently actually have a speaker that's right near the head of some poor soul who's sitting in a top corner. What happens there is that all you can hear if you're sitting there is that freaking speaker that's right behind you. It becomes harder to hear the people on stage. It becomes harder to hear any other sound effects. It's just those damn crickets that you went and put in that one speaker. So first we have to go over one important aspect of this whole thing, and that is how loud things are coming out of your speakers. Loudness is measured in decibels, decibel SPL for sound pressure level. It's a relative scale. And don't be scared. I'm just going to tell you one thing. Every time you double the distance from a sound source, like a speaker or even somebody talking, that the volume, the sound pressure level, drops by 6 decibels. So now you're wondering to yourself, what does 6 decibels sound like? It's a good question. Here is a reasonable tone, 500 hertz at a level. I won't make it terribly loud because you're watching a video and it would really irritate you. All right, and here it is, 6 dB quieter. So if you were listening to that tone and you were, say, 10 feet away from a speaker, and it sounded like this, if you move 20 feet away from the speaker, it'll sound like this. Let's use the example of a super rockin' out band playing a groovy rock song. So this is one level. And this is the level twice as far away. All right, so you're always working with the inverse square law. For every doubling of distance, you lose 6 dB. So if you have the speakers really far away from everybody equally, then the sound will sound about the same all across your audience. So specifically having that speaker that's just a few feet away from the head of some poor soul sitting in the back of the audience, that's generally going to be terrible. Having the speakers pretty far away from people and way up in the grid will generally be okay. Now you'll notice back here in this space, you've got these 2 speakers on stands. That's going to make this part of the house left and the house right audience get whumpused with sound, and people up here will be in a fairly safe area where they won't get whumpused as much. But if you put those speakers way up here, you have the advantage way up here in the grid and aim them down, they'll be about equidistant to everybody in your audience. Even if they aren't exactly equidistant to everyone in your audience, remember your doubling of distance is 6 dB law, means that it won't be that big of a difference because you won't be certainly doubling the distance to the people in the back of the house, because that would be a 6 dB difference. So what can you do if you want to have speakers right behind people in a house? Well, the cheap, dirty, easy trick is to take your speaker and actually turn it around so it's facing away from the audience. And if you turn it up so it's like hitting the rafters above you, it generally has the kind of effect where it sort of seems like your sound is now in a further distance than the theater even is. Now there's one other sort of almost standard speaker setup. And that is to do what I call quad over the stage. I don't know if anybody else has got any other words for it, but let's look at a plan of this. Now this house is a little bit small for doing this. Quad over the stage would mean to take 2 speakers and put them up high at the edges of the proscenium. So you have 2 speakers up high on the edges of the proscenium, and then 2 speakers up high at the back wall of the stage itself. This is a fairly common technique, actually. Now, what happens is those speakers at the back wall kind of pulls and tugs the sound into the stage. You sort of feel it off in this world a little bit. It has another significant advantage in that if you're doing a show with dance, your dancers will tend to really want to hear the sound loud, the music that they're dancing to. They want that cranked. Let me talk to you about stereo just for a moment here. Stereo is something that by and large does not exist in real life. It's a psychoacoustic phenomenon where if you have two speakers, you can make a single sound seem like it's coming from somewhere in between the two speakers. That really only exists, or can really only exist, for people sitting directly between those two speakers. So in most theaters, you've really only got a half dozen seats that could possibly experience anything that we would call actual stereo. It's really only the seats here in the middle that could be stereo. They're not going to be stereo. You've got a lot of other problems to deal with, and nobody else is experiencing stereo. So stereo doesn't really exist. Multi-channel, however, that exists a lot. So most like MP3s, all compact discs, any record from like 1966 on is in stereo. Most of your audio files that you have on your computer have two channels. But that doesn't mean that you're limited to two channels of output. So this device has 8 inputs and 10 outputs that you can assign to different things. So you could plug your main two speakers into one pair of outputs, and then maybe the two speakers that are behind the audience into another couple, and then you could have one that's reserved for a radio that's on stage that you've got another feed to, and you can have all these different things. I hope that helped. We might have to do more on this. Actually, you know what? This space is so big that I would definitely want to have a center cluster so that you'd have one over this set of steps, one over this set of steps, and one in the middle just to try to fill out this sort of thing. But I think this, well, we don't really know where the ceiling is in this, so we don't really know where the grid height is. Hopefully it's pretty high so that the speakers that are over the stage are not unnecessarily hitting the people here in the lower seats and not getting the people in the higher seats.